Hello, welcome back to Godless Tactics Abridged, where last time we went over to the front lines of the war and helped out our allies by splashing out on more forces to help and leading them forward to a bunch of victories. We secured a frontline position by taking a few hard to take back locations, allowing us to essentially now forget about that war. We've probably got all the time we need. It's not the only front line to worry about. You can see on the map here this blue blob I've secured in the middle is our general frontline area. That'll hold up the red blobs for a bit, but the red blobs are also advancing up there. What we're going to do is hope that that doesn't matter. All we need is a certain amount of time without being game overed to go and do the story objective, which is what I'm going to do right now. Essentially, we just have to walk really far to the right for this story objective, so we'll start going there. Along the way, we complete a mission to defeat 1,000 enemies, I think it was, which gives us an ancient rifle. There are guns in this game. There are lore reasons why they're not in particularly wide circulation. And when you equip them, you do become weaker to some extent. You become weaker to magical attacks. However, they are supposed to be an upgrade on normal weapons. So we'll start working towards having quite a few gunners in our party. They come in useful in all sorts of combat situations, and we have a combat situation right here to test this new gun out in when this offensive combat patrol with a few decent leveled characters comes over. The gun is pretty high damage, although it's not always the best accuracy. Giving it to someone like a duelist who tends to have really high accuracy offsets that, so there we were landing those 100% chance to hit attacks, which did okay damage even against an enemy with really high defense. And there's OPD with the boost for extra move to go in for the finish. Nice cheeky little godless tactic for you there. And here's the much more godless tactic you can do with guns. It's using them for sync watch. Because they're very powerful, you might as well try to land a lot of hits with them in the same turn, and sync watch is perfect for that. We just have someone with a rifle on sync watch, and then the fighting goes on around them thanks to the rifle's long range. They can take part in a lot of the fights nearby and take out multiple enemies with extra hits, and big damaging extra hits in that case as well. We wouldn't have been getting those kills without the sync watch. All good stuff. Now we storm to the north for a little bit in order to follow the road network a bit more and to go for a story objective, turn a refuge there. It's a major settlement in the center of this big forested area, and it's the highest level place in the area. So what we can potentially do is just take the middle, and then that would allow our allies to move out and take the rest. In this case, we won't be making the investments needed to do that, because we don't have to. We're going to be just running on after this. But I thought I would do the story mission since I happen to be walking past it, just to show it off, I guess. In we go. They happen to have reinforced with an offensive combat patrol, so there will be quite a few enemies here in this refuge. We're underground in this weird looking place. This map is essentially 3 corridors with some smaller corridors in between them. Our guys are deployed in front of 2 of those corridors, so we'll just walk up them. It's going to be to our advantage, this map, because it's very closed. There are pillars and obstacles and fences everywhere inside. This means you can't really move very far. That favours using powerful, long-ranged weapons due to the Fire Emblem style rule, which is that ranged weapons can shoot through everything. Makes absolutely no sense, but whichever hacks made Fire Emblem didn't have to program line of sight, so neither does Ice Arrow Games. I suppose that's the standard. We take a bit of damage there on the right onto Bonjum. That's not so much of an issue in this specific situation, because even though Bonjum will be weak, we can get out of this right now. We can run past these enemies towards that base over there, if we do a bit of a boost to move further. Very cheeky. We could actually deploy somebody right out of this base after removing Bonjum to give us an extra attack this turn. Well, I didn't bother. I just sort of sat around in this area just because those enemies aren't very high level. I'll show that off later in the campaign. You can do some really big exploits if you're fighting immediately next to some of your own bases when it comes to deploying and withdrawing soldiers in the same turn. In the middle, that's where the real action is. We've taken the very center of the map. Now the enemy can't really get towards us easily because there are so many obstacles and pillars in the way. We'll just kind of chill near our base and snipe away at anything coming close to us, again taking full advantage of the Fire Emblem everything always has line of sight rules. Very useful, makes ranged units generally more powerful in this game. The only downside to them is that if you are in melee, you don't get counterattacks at all, and you can exploit that by attacking enemies with melee weapons as well. As you can see, we do work our way through that group of enemies in front of us. That's a set gone. but more are swarming in. Two Phones takes a nasty hit there, losing most of his health. Luckily it's not followed up upon, and he's next to one of our bases so he can just leave and avoid any risk of death. Not that there's really much risk in that area, since our little group can finish off the enemy group, and it's indeed Two Phones landing the final blows with this triple attack. He has surprisingly high speed, or perhaps this enemy has surprisingly low speed. There is a random element to the stats of enemies. And off Two Phones goes. Now that we've withdrawn 2 party members, we've got space to put more party members on the board in the middle where most of the enemies are, so this is a pretty handy switch. I first put a Synergist down. That's not that useful against the nearby enemy Breaker who resists magical attacks. Instead I'll put this Stalwart down. The Stalwart, surprisingly, is good enough to kill this Breaker in one hit. Well, we are 10 levels above them. In this game, being something like 7 levels, I think it is, in the balancing, means you are effectively invincible to an enemy, and you get no experience for killing them, which we saw just then. Now it's time for some Sync Watch action. We can set a Sync Watch up that has range on 3 of those fighters coming in. Actually deliberately made a weaker attack with Off ED to make use of the Sync Watch, because the enemy in the middle is easier to kill, so we'll have somebody else attack there who is perhaps weaker than Off ED. We might be able to get some more efficient damage distribution, something like that. Need to do a switch with Bugs to bring him into range to land an attack on that corner enemy. Barely any damage, not too significant, but the Sync Watch kicks in and does loads of damage. That's what we like to see. So we're starting to witness the difference here between using Sync Watch on a powerful character and not doing it. It makes you way more powerful in the right situations. You can build your entire party around this by giving everyone a weapon called a Target Painter, which gives you really long range, low damage attacks that just trigger Sync Watches all the time. Might try that out later on just to see how the strategy works. Here we are later in the fight. We essentially sat there just grinding the enemy down at our central point for a bit until they'd lost enough soldiers for us to skip the rest of this battle. As mentioned, we didn't really need to be doing this, but since we have done it, let's see what happens. I guess the mission reward for doing that mission is enough of a reason to pop by and quickly take this place. We also get a cutscene where we're recovering some of the refugees population. The refugees are full of sort of dormants, as it's called in the game. Population who don't really participate in the world for all sorts of lore reasons. It kind of sounds nefarious, but it's not really supposed to be. The other stuff the cutscene mentions is how the local people seem to be employed by the enemy quite happily and are sort of annoyed at the prospect of being taken over by some of the other refuge states. And our bosses give us a call and tell us not to think about that too much. Well, it all sounds like nothing shady is going on whatsoever. We'll just carry on merrily. While we're at the refuge, we can power up. This place sells some better weapons than we currently have because it's a high-level settlement. If it was one of my bases, it would be buffed even further in terms of what it sells by the reputation rewards that increase gear quality. We'll see that sometime, I expect. I move on over to a nearby city and take it just because it's on the way, and then complete this mission, which you do by just leveling up a bunch of settlements nice and easy, and it gives you tons of reputation reward and an ancient rifle. That's pretty handy. And that reward takes us past the 800 threshold, which unlocks the class upgrade. This means one of your classes will get permanently better. For us, it's our duelists. They are now specialists. Which class it is depends on what faction you're working for. So they're now a bit better. We'll find somebody useful to give that rifle to and carry on. All we need to do is walk off, as I keep saying, so we'll leave this forested area, cross through this swampy looking area, then there's a passageway through some impassable forests into Yumba's core territory up there in the top right. All we need to do is get there, but as usual we might as well kill people who happen to be on the way just to get a few battle commendations and scraps of resources. We're high enough level that there's nothing on the way that should challenge us until we're a bit further in. We have to fight on the other side of that swampy area, because to go through the forest on the other side, we first have to break through this choke point guarded by a castle and a bunch of stuff. We could wait to see if that stuff went away, but we might as well go in and attack. Not going to be too hard. And this is another battle where we can use the castle's defences against the defenders. Because we outrange so many of the defending units, we can sit on the other side of their defences and just shoot in, and those defences make it hard for the enemy to come across and get into range with us. A cheeky switch there allows us to take a second shot in this turn, taking out 2 enemies swiftly. We do a similar thing down to the south end of this trench line, where there's a line of stakes that we can get the enemy stuck on by just standing in front of them. If they are on the stakes, they get debuffed. While they're behind them, it's hard for them to advance, reducing their options for attacking us. We move up here with the flamethrower as well, which fires multiple times over the stakes. That's got to do some damage. If this game had environmental damage, that would probably be pretty cool, but unfortunately, whoever made this trash didn't think of that. We go on to fight past the auto-resolve save just to steal some bases, and that's that. We then move through the woods behind this castle and come out the other side. We're now in a new area. This is Yumba's core territory, and we're going to see some higher level parties in this zone. Fortunately, we can now do 2-star auto-resolve, so we can take down that party pretty fast. We just have to be careful that we don't get attacked. Since somebody might come over and kill us, we get attacked by a small enemy party that's nothing too much to worry about. One thing to note in this battle though, is that Yumba are starting to deploy their specialist class, the Charger. This is an upgraded form of the Breaker class, a DPS class. Essentially they move really far and do loads of damage, so they can just suicide charge you and kill somebody. Their weakness, they're easy to kill themselves, so as long as you get in there fast and take them out, that's alright. We'll be looking out for those in the future. Well, actually, I suppose we won't, and that's explained by what's to follow. I move deeper into enemy territory, picking up some points of interest along the way for some bonus stuff, and at some point we cross a threshold for how close we are to the enemy's headquarters, which completes the Approach Yumba Core mission. This actually allows them to speak to us, and this is where we're going to have some plot decision making to go through, because they start trying to convince you to join their side. They've got this air of legitimacy because they're working for the old government of England and France, who apparently are still alive, trapped in space, to cut a long story short. You don't necessarily have to believe them, and you don't necessarily have to care, but ultimately, they give you the option to work for their side in the war instead of the newly emerging refuge states, as they're called. And we're going to say yes to that, because that's part of the most difficult possible plot route, is to first defect to Yumba, although this part is kind of easy because being on Yumba's side for this part of the war isn't too bad since they already control so much of the map. Once the cutscenes are done, it's sorted. These guys are now our allies. We don't have the option to fight them. To their northeast is where we would have gone if we'd said no to defecting. We would have gone on to just defeat Yumba next to us, and that progresses towards a quick ending to the campaign, or a quick route into the second part of the campaign, I should say. There's Dunra, the Yumba headquarters, where their cloned soldiers are coming from in the lore. What we need to do though is go back to where we were before, back to the front lines, and push them the other way now. One thing that helps us is a secret feature is that anywhere you've captured before this point in the campaign will automatically switch over to Yumba in a Yumba uprising, as a message says somewhere. This is to make it a bit less annoying to recapture things you've already captured. You might still have to do it depending on what happens before you get back there, but essentially the frontline situation suddenly switches to be more in our favour because we personally had taken a lot of these frontline locations earlier while training up and generally buying time for the war to carry on a bit longer for us to run over there and do that plan. So there was some logic behind all of that, although you certainly didn't have to do it that way. Now we can start using our vast reserves of cash to win this war for Yumba. We quickly deploy combat patrols on the front line that are vastly higher level than everything around them, so that'll get that frontline area secured quickly. Next, I'm going to use a feature we haven't seen yet. We're going to convert one of our settlements into a base. Anywhere controlled by your side that could be a base can be made a base for some cash. So Swomesh Labrin here is once again one of our bases. That's going to be very handy in a second. In the meantime, we've also got maximum reputations. I wanted to show off the push thing which appears in this menu. It's essentially an overflow for your reputation. Any reputation you gain over the maximum goes into the push pool instead, and every time you have 50 in there, it triggers a big push event, one of these things where your allies deploy loads of invasion forces at the same time and they're all leveled up as well, so you're probably going to take a load of territory off somewhere across the map. There's our current mission to take a certain set of places. A lot of them are in the Meshmedan core, so essentially we'll have to go there, which requires us to be at a certain level that we're not at yet, so we can't quite just rush through and complete that objective. We'll have some preparations we need to make. I've made a village here by this river into another AML base. Now I can use this cheap airlift function. We've seen the airlift thing before, but if you do it from an AML base, it's way cheaper. So we teleport forwards to our new base at Słomesh Labyrinth and use the shopping facilities here. Because it's a high level settlement and it's one of our bases, it gets the reputation reward upgrades to gear. This allows us to buy the best gear that you can buy in the game from this shop. It's pretty expensive though, so we can only buy one thing. I think I went with the Master Rifle in the end. You can get a tier of gun-style weapons that are better than the usual guns, and I think the AI will never deploy with them, so if you have them equipped, you'll know you're a bit better than the AI at the same level, which is nice. Once that's done, we just run forwards and prepare to get this thing going. I figured I could easily take out all of the stuff near the front line because I'm higher level, but it's not quite the case. There are some very high level enemies right at the front line. If they engaged us, we would be annihilated for sure, so we need to avoid that. There are also some high level allies nearby, and I was suspicious. I was thinking there's no settlements they could have come from in this area that's anywhere near that level. Then I remembered there's this place out in the middle of nowhere, which appears to have been recently captured by Lumida, perhaps by a field army. And that's where both the high-level enemies and allies must have been from. So we just need to bypass this area while that's under enemy control so they don't kill us. Easy enough, we run past and go back into the easy-to-defeat parts of the enemy front line. We rampage forwards, taking settlements, killing parties, gathering resources, and soon we come across a place we can use as a base. Then I'm going to invest all of my cash spamming out invasion forces and increasing the base's level, which increases the level of all the parties associated with it as well, creating this pile of stuff right here which will then rapidly fan out and take stuff in the area. We've helped out quite a bit already. I'm sure Yamba are dominating right across the map, but I didn't really pay too much attention, and things went swimmingly until they didn't, because after I advanced a bit towards the north, turning towards the enemy core, we started to see some serious opposition, like this stack of 60 or so level 40 enemies, and there's plenty more where that came from on the road behind. They are throwing some powerful stuff at us. It's probably coming out of their core regions here. Those offensive combat patrols don't deploy very often, but if an area hasn't been involved in the war, when you get close to it, it just deploys them all at once because it's saving them up. So there's now going to be a massive counter-attack wave coming down towards our new frontline positions. The only thing I can do is have enough money to upgrade some of my own settlements to the point when they can resist that attack, because I certainly can't take them down. I just kind of watch nearby, staying out of combat, and put all of my cash into the fight here. Unfortunately, it proved to not be enough, mainly because these combat patrols go first. They run out and die to the enemy, then the enemy run in and finish everything off, and boom, all of our frontline troops just disappear. The second an invasion force type party comes along, they'll occupy the territories and that will be that. And in the meantime, we need to get out of there because those offensive combat patrols might just attack me if I sit here. I did mention before that offensive combat patrols don't target the player, but that's actually under certain conditions. It's part of the way the game works to make it artificially easier. If you're weak or if you're in the early game, it might be. I can't remember the rules. Basically, early on, the offensive combat patrols pretend you don't exist because you can die in the first couple of turns if that's not the case. There's a modifier in the game set up to turn that off, which I might play sometime. So I had to run away, is the long story short there. I couldn't do any exploits with the combat patrols. What I need to do is seek out battles like that one I just went into. Battles where we can fight enemies that are at our level to gain experience points. To find those guys, we're going to abandon the front line. We're effectively going to peel off and not do our push anymore, because I figured it's not going to work with those patrols around. But if we run far enough away and all of our allies get killed, the patrols will eventually despawn once they're a certain distance from the base they came from. As for us, we just need to come back another time at a higher level. This means we'll be taking a sabbatical from this conflict to go and find some experience elsewhere. We'll go and find ourselves, so to speak. However, we can leave behind all of our cash in the form of troops at that base we took earlier. So we'll have one level 40 base defended by tons of guys that's right there on the road out of the enemy's core. They might waste tons of time trying to take that place, helping out our allies and making sure things don't change too much while we leave. That's all set up. Now we're just going to move down to the southeast and go after that castle I talked about earlier that's in the middle of nowhere, because it happens to be at the right level for us to face some challenging battles and get loads of experience. On the way, there are some rare points of interest out here in the middle of nowhere that drop various handy things. I think some of the best weapons in the game are like really in the middle of nowhere. If you go to the edges of the map and the least populated areas, you can find various extremely useful bits and bobs, which you can just go and get right at the start of the game if you want to be very cheeky. We arrive at the target castle, plenty of decently leveled enemies to kill and get us loads of experience. When you're fighting someone that's as strong as you level up pretty fast, so this is a good training exercise for us, and it will get rid of this thorn in the side of our allied front lines as well. We're going to strategically not go near the castle in order to draw out the guards type party. You might remember in the first part I mentioned the ones with the sword and shield will move out to attack you, unlike the regular garrisons, so we can split their force up into two halves here to make this easier. It's still a 7-star battle. It is important that it's specifically a 7-star battle, but I'll talk about that number next time as we go through our little training montage here.